Hey, what's up, players? Shikata and I back again. We're going to be doing a new series right now, and this will be the first video in that series called Don't Be a Tool. And essentially, I'm going to go over some different common tools that you'll see in the security industry, either by pen testers or bad guys alike, and kind of give you a rundown of how to use them properly, things like that. Some of the ones in my brain I want to go over other than today's, which will be Nmap, will be things like Burp Suite. The Dreatest Pro that I've been using here, or I'm sorry, the Dreatest Community Edition, SQL Map, things like that. Some well-known tools that people use that we can go ahead and tackle and learn a little bit about. Some will be long, some will be short as far as the videos, because some don't have really a ton of things to it. And I may actually bundle some together, like the password cracking. I may just put into one video where I go over a variety of different ones like Hydra and John the Ripper and things like that. So yeah, we'll tackle it from there, and it kind of borders a little bit on the dependency on tools. So let me break that down for a second. Let me delve into that. We never really want to, as a security professional, rely completely on these tools because in the real world, you may come across a time when you're just presented with, like if you're doing a pen test, you're presented with just a terminal, right? Or you're presented with just a Linux machine that you've busted into, or you need to do some scanning on or something like that. And it may rely on use and live off the land binaries, which would be things like Python maybe for Linux that is already installed on it, things like that. So it's always a good idea to learn some scripting language. The one that's usually preferred is Python because it's simple, quick, easy to learn, and it's on the majority of your different Unix and Linux, so you can actually create your own tool right then and there, on the spot, on the job, without having to say, man, I don't have my Metasploit, I don't have my Nmap or whatever. Make your own port scanner, right? That sort of thing. And so tools have their use, but I wouldn't rely completely on them because there may be some situations in a professional career where you may not have access to those, right? In that case, what are you going to do, right? Now, I do know from teaching the Certified Ethical Hacking course for 12 years that they are very tool-centric, very tool-heavy, which is why I don't necessarily recommend the CEH as your only cert to go into pen testing. It's a good understanding of some security tools and security concepts, but it's not necessarily going to help you too much on the job. Well, I'll just say from my own personal experience, it didn't help me at all when I jumped into the pen test field itself because there were a lot of caveats and a lot of things that I didn't think about. Plus, a lot of the tools that were on that particular certification were kind of dated. But again, I'm not crapping on the cert itself because it's a solid cert. It teaches you great, solid security principles. And some common tools like Nmap and HPing3 and stuff like that. Things that are still relevant today that you could still use. But I'm just trying to drive home the point that you don't want to kind of turn into that tool junkie, as it were, and do everything that way. A lot of times it takes just some brain power and some crafty bash shell scripting or something to that effect. So outside of that, I just want to take this series and teach you common tools that we would see every day in the cybersecurity world by a lot of professionals, because a lot of the stuff that's in my other series, like pop, another server drop, and things like that, where I'm using CTFs, I use a variety of tools in there, like Nmap and things like that. So I figured, well, what better jump off point to start this series than the tool that beats them all, which is Nmap, right? Nmap is used by pretty much everybody as a port scanner. So let's get into that a little bit. A port scanner essentially is for scanning ports, and the ports would be your entry point in to a system or a service. So for example, if the target was a unencrypted web server, it would likely be listening on port 80, which is HTTP. And that's just a common port. It doesn't have to listen on that. It can be on any port you want it to be. But if it's on a port that's not a common, what do they call it? Try to remember the name they give it. But anyways, there's like the first 0 through 1024 ports, well-known. That's the word they give it. It's not considered a well-known port, then you'll have to actually tell the person that's visiting your site, they have to put the IP address, then a port, whatever the port is you choose. So if you choose like port 7070 or whatever for your web server, that's not common. That would then have to be added in with a colon and then the port number in order to visit that website. So you'll see that a lot when you get into CTFs and war games, that you'll notice in your Nmap scans there's some odd ports that still register up as HTTP. That's because you're not tied to it. But generally speaking, you have your common ports like 23 for Telnet, 22 for SSH, 80 for HTTP, 443 for HTTPS, those sort of things. And those would fall under what they call well-known ports, and there's 65,535 ports, TCP and UDP, which those two things are what they call transport protocols, and we'll talk a little bit more about that here today. And the first 0 through 1023, because 0 is still considered a port, are going to be well-known ports like the one I just mentioned. Then you're going to have the range from 1024 on to about 49,000-ish area. That's going to be what they call registered ports. And the registered ports would be like if I had Cisco, like let's say Cisco had some software that ran on a particular port. They would contact IANA, which kind of runs all of these different ports and IPs and all that good stuff, and they would register that port for their service. So it's well known that MS SQL runs on 1433, something like that. That would be a consideration of a registered port. Then when you get up to 49,000-ish on up to about 65,535, those are going to be what they call dynamic ports, and those are just created dynamically. So if I'm trying to reach a web server that's listening on port 80, the port I'm coming out of my client to that server is going to be something up in that range, 49,000-ish on up, and it's going to be dynamically generated. Okay, so that's what they consider that. So Nmap will go ahead and poke and prod at some different services and ports that it's looking at and try to determine what's running on that port. And it will look at its known list of ports, and it also has some different other areas. So let me go over there real quick while we're here. So if I go over to CD, this is on Kali Linux, by the way. It may be different for where you're at. I think it's USR share /nmap, I believe. Maybe I'm wrong. Nope, I'm right. There we go. So in this here, this is where the main directory here is for your Nmap stuff. So here you see some different files. The ones that we're going to be kind of looking at a little bit here would be like this one, scripts, right? Those sort of things, and protocols as well. So when I talk about a particular one called S_V, I'll come back and reference this here. But I just want to point out that Nmap has its own, like I said, folder with all kinds of different things that it uses to determine what's running on those ports. And Nmap has a variety of different switches called, they're parameters that go along with the command itself. So Nmap - something. Now, I'll probably say TAC. That's just ingrained in me for some reason. I've been saying that all my life. So instead of dash, I'll say TAC. So if you hear that, spill out of my mouth, that's what that means. I don't want you to be confused by it. Now, when I taught this when I used to teach for 12 years and do boot camps, right? The tech boot camps and the CEH and all that other stuff, I did a particular technique because I noticed, for just as an example on the CEH exam, they're very hardcore about their tools, right? They love their tools on that test. You got to know all the tools that they mention on that test. And it's difficult because there's 3 fat books. I don't know if that's still the case, but there's 3 fat books of domains and tools and things like that. And for the Nmap one, I remember I took 3 different exams, the version 7, 8, and 9, passed them so that I could teach each one when they came out. So I just took the test again. Every time I took the test, they always had a ton of Nmap. A ton. So if you're thinking about taking the CEH, you should know your command line Nmap. I'm not talking about the GUI version called ZenMap. That was very rarely seen on the exam. It's mostly command line stuff for Nmap. But I also noticed on there they would ask specific things. They would say, if I were to use the stealth scan, what flags would I see? And by flags, they're talking about the TCP flags like SYN, SYNAC, that sort of thing. They want to know those sort of questions. So what I came up with on my exam was to actually run the commands and then capture it in Wireshark so they could see it. And the reason for that is they had a misprint on some of the books where they were they were wrong. Let's just put it that way, in their response. Now, it wasn't anything groundbreaking that, just tore the house down. But I would always tell my students, go with what's in the book. So same thing I'll tell you if you're taking a CEH, go with what's in the book. However, there are a few ones there where they said, well, the response from this particular scan should be RST. That's not the case. One of them will be an RST-ACK or something like that. So, I mean, little things like that may confuse people. But I found by doing that and having them do it in Wireshark with me, it made them understand it a lot more, what's going on behind the scenes, because you never want to turn into what they consider a script kiddie, which is essentially just blasting and running commands without knowing anything behind what's going on, without knowing the methodology, those sort of things. You don't want to turn into that. You want to actually be an informed cybersecurity professional who knows how to use their tool, why they're using their tool, why they're using certain switches, and the methodology behind it. So let's get into it a little bit here. So I didn't want to type a lot today, so I used my sweet Dratus, and I will do a video on this one, how to use Dratus, the community edition, to do what I'm doing here, and also how to bring in scans from Burp Suite and things like that. But that's for another video. So I've actually gone ahead and kind of ordered them here as a cheat sheet, as you will, so that I can just kind of copy and paste some of them because I just don't like typing a ton. But that being said, let's go ahead and do a few typing. Now, I also ran a couple ahead of time because there are a couple that do take a while to run. And so I ran those and then I'll explain them. But for the majority of them, I'll just do them live here. I'm using another VM called Metasploitable 2. I know it's an older VM that used to be used for like capture the flags and things like that, but I used it because it has a ton of open ports. So it's a great one to teach Nmap because it has both TCP and UDP open ports that I can teach with. So it's pretty cool for that. All right, so let's get into it. Now, if you're not familiar with Wireshark, Wireshark is what they call a protocol analyzer or a network sniffer. And what it will do is it will just capture your traffic and you can view all of your traffic. So when I run a particular Nmap command and I want to explain why it's doing this, I'll reference this Wireshark. I won't do it for everything, but I mean, I'll just kind of show you what it's doing so you can kind of get a better level of understanding. And I'll also kind of go over the TCP and UDP concept as well. But let's get a first scan out of the way. So the victim in this case is the .103 address. So I'm going to say I'm just going to not add any switches at all. I'm just going to say Nmap 192.168.56.103. Okay. And I'm going to turn on my capture just so I can capture it and show you after. So we'll go ahead and hit enter. Now there's a ton of ports that are open on this particular VM, so there should be a lot shown up here. But essentially what's going on here is it's doing some pinging, it's doing some ARP. If you're not familiar with those terms, we'll talk about it. But essentially I have it written here, just kind of the path that it follows, what I'm doing right here. So when I do the Nmap, by the way, this, if you're online, this is free for you to scan if you want to practice with an online target where they give you permission to do it. Do not do any scanning of any live targets without permission. Disclaimer. This one, they give you permission. Nmap says, yes, scan this. So you can scan that if you want to find it. There's a few ports on it. So to practice, you can use that address. I'm not online, though, on this. I'm using localhost. So, but what it will do is it will start by converting the host name to an IP version 4 address. By host name, they're talking about like the DNS host name. In our case, we're just using an IP address, so I don't really need to do that. And then afterward, it will ping the target, okay? Now, in a lot of scans that I've done, like for some CTFs and stuff like that, it may show up in their Nmap that the scan did not complete. And the reason why is because the other side has disabled ICMP. Ping is a program that it's actually an actual application, but it uses the protocol called ICMP. So if the other side, your target, has disabled ICMP, your pings won't go through, echo request, echo response. So a lot of times that will cancel your Nmap scan out and it just won't scan. Or it may directly say that we don't know if the hosts are up or whatever because of blah, blah, blah. You can disable that ability to do the pinging by doing this capital PN here, right there. And we'll talk about that as well. But that will disable the pinging. But anyways, what it then does after it does the two things here. It will then convert the IP version 4 address back to a host name. Now, again, if you want to speed up your scans a little bit, you can say, forget that. I don't want to actually get the reverse DNS stuff. So for that, you can do attack N, and that will basically disable that step right here, and it will kind of speed things up a little bit. You'll find that I do that a lot in my scans. I usually do attack N, attack PN, regardless, all the time, because I don't need it. But if you did want to do it, you can do it that way. Okay, so then it will launch its TCP port scan and we'll start going through a range. And now for me, I didn't add any options. I didn't specify any ports. So typically by default, it will only scan TCP. Now, this is what they call a transport protocol. And if you know your OSI layer, this would be layer 4. And this is where they say, okay, how do I get the packet from A to B? Do I want it to reliable where all of the packets and all the pieces of the packet get to its destination? Or do I just want it fast and I don't care if they get there? The analogy I would give in my classes would think of it like a delivery truck. So I used to work shipping and receiving in a warehouse, and when a truck comes in, they'd give you a ledger or some sort of paperwork and it says, okay, you have 10 packages. And I would check, okay, I see package 1, I see package 2, package 3, and if I don't see package 5, I'll say, hey man, what's up, player? Go back and get package 5 for me. So then they would have to drive back, get the package, and come back. Now, obviously, that takes more time, right? Because now he has to go back and get the package or that one piece of it. But my whole order is not complete without it, right? So same with port scanning. I want to have a complete communication between A and B, and I want all of the packets to go through. So I want it to be reliable, if you will, and I want to make sure every piece of that packet, if it says I've got 10 pieces to this packet, I want all 10, okay? It may take longer, but I'll have the confidence to know that the entire packet is there. Now, on the flip side, if I was a delivery truck and I had put a bunch of packages in the back and I just ripped down the road Fast and Furious style with Vin Diesel driving, and some of the packages fall out of the back of the truck, I don't really care. It got to the destination quickly, and whatever it had left for packets, it gave them. But the key thing in my brain was I don't really care about getting the complete order. I just want something there quickly. And that would be kind of like your VoIP, right? Streaming video, those sort of things would use UDP. So UDP would be considered that where it's not connection oriented, and the TCP is connection oriented. And the premise behind it is the TCP one would send what they call a SYN packet, and then the computer that you're going to would send something called a SYN ACK or acknowledgement, saying I acknowledge the actual SYN packet that you had sent. Then my computer would then send what they call an ACK, meaning I acknowledge this entire transfer here, and then that would be a full connection. I now am connected. They call it a three-way handshake. So a SYN from A to B, and then from B to A is a SYN ACK, and then from A back to B is the final ACK. And then from there, the connection is made, and now packets can start flowing freely, and TCP ensures all of the packets get there. Once I've established that connection to that other computer, all of the packet flow can now go. So that's the idea behind TCP being reliable. So by default, Nmap, without any switches, will do a TCP only scan of the most common, I think it's called the top 1,000 ports, and that's it. I have to be specific if I want all of the ports. So in this particular case, if we come back here and look, we can see there's a ton of ports that are open on this particular one. But it came up and said, yeah, 21's open, 22, 23, and it went down through and it found all these particular ones that are open. So if we go over here, back to my Wireshark, and go all the way up to the top, you can see here, it starts off by doing some ARPs. Now, ARP would be a broadcast, and it basically says on the network that I'm on, it will shout out and say, who has, blah, blah, blah IP address. Tell blah, blah, blah here. So in this particular case here, if I'm querying and I want to know who has 103, because our target was 103. So I'm asking as 101, that's me, the machine I'm on now is 1.101. I'm saying, hey, everybody who's on the network, who has .103? Please tell 101. And so their response will be, I am 103, and my MAC address, which is the physical address of your NIC card, is this. Now I can actually communicate with that machine because I found that machine, and they start sending the SYN packets out. Now in this particular case, if the port is open without any switches here, as I was mentioning, it's a TCP three-way handshake, it will do the SYN packet, and then it will do a SYN ACK, and then I will end up with an ACK packet. So let's take this particular one, 21, because I know the port is open, I believe, yes. So I'm gonna right click it, and I'm gonna say follow TCP stream, and what it will do is it will actually go ahead and filter for me the entire sequence for this particular one. So we can see, as I was mentioning, we have a SYN, we have a SYN ACK, but in this case, it just sent an RST back. So the actual, my computer sent a reset for this particular one. Now, by default, because I'm running as root, it runs something they call a stealth scan. And I'll explain that here in a moment. But if I actually didn't want this RST, but instead I wanted a full ACK, SYN, ACK, and ACK, I would have to specify something called the TCP Full Connect. So I would do a Nmap-S-T. That does a full connect, full SYN, ACK, and then ACK. Okay. In this case, if I don't specify anything, by default, it will run something called a stealth scan, S. We'll talk about that here again in a little bit. So the SYN, ACK, and you can see the port. If you look down here, I'm going to go to click on the SYN packet. If you look down here below, you'll see there's a TCP section right here, and you can expand or close it, right? So if I open up this here, you can see the source port, which is my machine, is one of those ones up in the 49,000-ish area, the ones I call dynamic ports, and it's going to destination port 21. It's sending the SYN, and if it responds with a SYN ACK, it tells me, or tells Nmap, port 21 is open. So therefore, in my brain, using something called a stealth scan, I send an RST. You're probably thinking, well, why? So the principle behind a stealth scan is so that you can try to evade logs and the admin, all CNI of Sauron, to see what you're doing, because a lot of times they'll kind of block this sort of thing. So there are some login and some filters and some IDSs and things like that that may only filter as far as raising an alert if a full TCP connection happens. So if the victim was only filtering for a full connect, which would be SYN, ACK, and ACK, it would then say, flag it, because I don't recognize this IP address, I don't recognize this source port, this and that. That's now I'm being caught as an attacker, right? So the principle behind the stealth scan is to never do the full connect, because I kind of know the answer to the question when I get a SYN ACK back. So if I send a SYN to a port and it doesn't send me anything, or it sends me an RST, I know it's not open. But if I send a SYN to a port, a SYN packet, and it sends a SYN ACK back, I know it's open, more than likely, high degree of possibility. Therefore, in order for me to not do a full connect, I send a reset packet, and that basically ends that. So it doesn't actually get to the full connect state. Now, you're probably thinking maybe, well, what's the SYN and SYN ACK and all this other stuff? If you actually look here under your TCP protocol section here under Wireshark, I'm going to scroll up a little bit here, and you open up this thing called flags, you're going to find there are a few different flags. We have FIN, we have SYN, we have reset, push, acknowledgement, and urgent, and two extras that are there for future use, which I don't think they've ever used. So in this case here, all I'm doing is by the 1, it means I'm setting that flag on. If I put a 0, it means I'm setting the flag off. So if I do a SYN ACK, you should see now a 1 in the SYN, but also a 1 here. So let's take a look at that packet. And there it is. So you can see there's a 1 right there, and then there's a 1 here under SYN. That's what I mean by SYN ACK packets. So hopefully that clears that up. And then you can see again by looking at this stuff here where the source ports are and where the destination port is. So this particular packet is coming from 103, which is the target, and we can see it's port 21, right, to my random dynamically generated address. Now again, if I did S-T and specified that, it would do a SYN-ACK session right here instead of the RST. But I didn't do it, so that's what that comes through. Now to clear your Wireshark filter and get back to your regular full packets, you can just click on the X up here and it gets back to it. So anyways, that's why I use this Wireshark to kind of explain those sort of things. And if you are taking the actual CEH exam, you are going to have to understand that process, because they will ask you for sequence numbers, because the SYN packet gets sent with a particular sequence number, and then the target will send back the SYN-ACK, but there will be a different type of sequence number that's there. On the exam for CEH, they'll ask you for the third sequence number. They'll say, here's the first one for the SYN, here's the second one for the SYN-ACK. What would be the ACK's sequence number? You have to be able to predict it by using common, mathematics, things like that. So that would be something important for you to learn. Anyways, so that's covering capital S, which is stealth. Again, by default, with no switches, it's going to run a stealth scan. All right, let's go to the next one here. So in this case, if I wanted to make it look as if I'm coming from, or if I wanted to use different DNS servers for my scan, I can use this switch here, tac DNS-servers, and then list the ones that I actually want. Okay, so this one here is very common. You'll see it here where I can just pick a different DNS server. Nothing big groundbreaking there. As I mentioned before, the TAC PM will say, hey, listen, don't ping, because if they disable ICMP, I won't be able to get my packet through, so that's no good. The TAC-N, again, is to speed things up a little bit. If you don't need to do any DNS resolution or anything like that, you can use the TAC-N to disable that ability. All right, let's get into actually specifying ports. So in this case here, let me go back here and start my capture again. So in this case, if I decided I want to actually look for a specific set of ports, I can use Nmap TAC-P, and then I'd say 1 through, 30. And then give the IP address. That would be the syntax here. Like that. And then it will scan for just ports 1 through 30. Now the ports, when it says TAC-P, it can be done a variety of different ways. I'm going to show you back here what that looks like. A little further down, we'll show you kind of what that looks like. But these are the actual categories that you're going to see that show up from the response. Okay, the port could be open, or the port could be closed. Those are pretty common sense. But then you may have this filtered, which tells me that based on the response I got back, I'm guessing this is coming through a firewall or being protected behind a firewall or some sort of filter of that case there. So a lot of the times you'll see open or closed, but every now and then if they're using some sort of device in between it, there'll be some sort of filtered and unfiltered in that case there. So let's go back and look, and we can see here's up to port 30. These are the ones that are open. And if we go back and look at our capture, and we'll scroll all the way up to the top here, we can see here first again it does its ARPs, right, the broadcast and all that kind of good stuff. And then it starts getting into looking for port 23, looking for port 21, 22, 25. It just does them randomly here. It doesn't do it really in sequential order. And as we go down through, anything that comes up as a SYN-ACK is essentially what we're going to have. But again, we're using the stealth scan by default because we didn't specify any particular one. So you'll see a lot of that RSTs in there as well. But as you go down through them, that's kind of where it's finding any of that information. So pretty cool stuff. That one there, just doing the ports. Now, when it comes to the actual ports itself, it's okay to actually do stuff like this. You can do that, okay? That's no big deal. It'll work. You can do T:, and that will say only TCP ports 1 through 30, so no UDP, which it does by default. And I'll talk about that in a little bit when we talk about UDP scanning. If you wanted to scan just a couple different ones, not a range, you do a, let's say you want to do 21, 22. So you can do a comma and you can say just scan ports 21, 22, and port 80, something like that. So that's another way you can do the ports. Another one here is if you want to scan all 65,535 ports, you would do a TAC-P TAC. It's going to scan all of them. So it'll be a long scan, but you'll get all ports hit. TCP. Now, again, if you want to do UDP, we'll do something different for that here in just a moment. So there's a variety of ways, like I said, that you can do the port portion of it itself, and it's really here or there, whatever way you want to do it. All right, now let's talk about adding some specific switches here, so we don't just do the stealth scan. We want to actually do something different. Now, when we did the first initial port scan, for instance, we saw here open FTP. Okay. And the reason why is because it recognized that port 21 is open, and it looked at its well-known port list, and it said, well, FTP, we have two ports actually, 20 and 21. But in this case, we're saying FTP is on port 21. So that's what Nmap came back with. But I don't actually know what version is running, right? Because there are some different vulnerable versions of FTP, or VSFTP is an example of one. But I don't actually know what it is. Now, if you go here, and you're in the actual Nmap directory for wherever you installed Nmap, you will see this one right here, Nmap service probes. Okay, so if I go ahead and I say leafpad that, you'll see here that there's a variety of different software. So we're going to just pick one at random here. So here is one called ActiveSync from Microsoft, version 3.7. And below it, there's a variety of different signatures, as you will, that it's unique to this particular software in that particular version. So if I poke and prod, like, you know, the, what do you call it, the Pillsbury Doughboy there, where you poke the belly, that's an old school one from back in the 80s. If I were to poke and prod at that port and it returns with any of this that you see here as a response, then Nmap looks at this list and says, okay, they're running Microsoft ActiveSync version 3.7. I have a high degree of confidence that that's the case because they match whatever signature they have here. And there's a lot of nonsense that's listed here, but you get the point. And you can see as you go down through, there's a variety of different ones. There's an Ability FTP server, semantic antivirus scan engine, tons of stuff, right? So this is a massive, massive document. Now, that's what it's using to determine what port number is being run. Now, if I wanted to find out what actual versions are on those ports, I would use the S_V. Now, I already ran this ahead of time because this one takes a lot longer because it has to go and probe through that list. So I just ran it ahead of time, but I'm using my TAC-N to disable the DNS resolution, the TAC-PN to disable the pinging, and then the S_V for version scan. Now, I also added in this one here called the default script scan, but we'll talk about that later. And you can see here that not only now does it tell me that 21 is open and that it's FTP, but now it tells me the version of that is VSFTPD 2.3.4. Now, if you look online for that version for a vulnerability, you're likely going to come across one where they had a backdoor that was actually left in there by accident by the developers, and it would use a smiley face to be able to compromise it. So it's useful for attackers to use the version to go look on ExploitDB and find some different attacks. So I know this server I'm looking at has that version. I now have a way to break into that machine because I know this version is vulnerable to certain things. Okay, that's the use of S_V. Pretty awesome stuff. Then we have TAC-A. Now, TAC-A will look kind of similar, and I've already ran that one too because that one's a long one that runs a while. So here you can see I did the TAC-N, the TAC-PN, and the TAC-A. And then from there, it ran and it showed a variety of things. Now, let me tell you what this one does. This is called an aggressive scan. Now, if your intent from a cybersecurity professional perspective is to be not noisy, you don't run this one. This one's extremely noisy. It will be picked up and seen by admins more than likely because it's running 4 different things. First, it will do a operating version scan, and that one will use, let me scroll down here. That one will use, where is it at? Here it is. It will use this one here, OSDB. It will use that file, which is very similar to the other one that I showed you, but it will be signatures related to a particular software version of an OS. So Windows 7, Windows 8, whatever, it has a particular signature in the response. It will use that to determine it. So it runs a TAC capital O first, which is an operating system scan. Then it will run a version scan. We just saw that, S capital V. It'll run that one. Then it will run something called a default script scan, which we'll get into scripting in a little bit, which will look at any scripts that are in the default category. And lastly, it will run a trace route. So it does all four of those, which is why it's kind of confusing to me when I look at some walkthroughs and some CTFs. I was always interested to watch some of these guys type in Nmap, TAC capital A, TAC SV. To me, it's like, why? Because TAC A, it implies that. It already has that in it. So kind of weird. But anyways, that's just a little caveat of mine, a little sidebar. So anyways, that one's an aggressive one, but it does a lot of different things. And again, you can see a lot of verbose information. Here's some of the scripts it was running, right? Those sort of things. And at the very end, after it does all that stuff, you can see it does a trace route, okay? So that one there is an aggressive scan, pretty cool stuff. Now, if I wanted to do a ping scan to just find just to ping the addresses in this case here, not using the capital PN, obviously, I would use S capital P. So in that particular one, we just basically do Nmap, TAC S capital P, and then 192.168.56.103. This is just basically seeing if the targets are alive, if the ports are alive in this particular case here, and it's going to do a ping scan to tell me if it's up and running, and that's the intent of it, okay? And then, if I didn't want to include the ARP request in it, I could do the TAC send-IP. In this case, the ARP being the broadcast, okay? So that's an example of what they'll see there for it. And in this case, host is up. That's all it does. Now, if I had a range of them, I would do a CIDR, which would be like a number at the end of it, slash something or other for a subnet. So I could do that as well, and that would show me multiple different ones. But I only have one machine up, so that's all I get. So that one there would be what they call the ping scan, all right? So as I mentioned before, you can do ports in a variety of different ways. You get the capital P, you know, where they're like butted up against each other. That's perfectly fine. You can do the range, as I mentioned, and if you want to do all ports, you get the TAC P TAC. And then this one here where you can specify TCP ports and UDP. Now this one is a little interesting. This was kind of misleading because it's not actually going to work. And let me show you why, because now this will kind of lead into the next one I was going to do. So if I said Nmap, and again, we'll do our TAC N, TAC PN. If I said TAC P T, capital T, colon 22, because I know it has port 22 open, and I do know it has UDP port 137 open, I can say TAC T, colon 22, comma, capital U, colon 137. So I do know it does have that port open for UDP. 192.168.56.103. Okay? Now in this particular case, you'll notice something interesting. It only shows me the open 22. That's because, as I mentioned, by default, Nmap always does a TCP scan. I have to specify it with S capital U. So if I come back here before really the order of it doesn't really necessarily matter from my understanding. So if I do an S capital U, and then we'll do a S capital S, and that's the TCP portion, and then the U for the UDP. So now if I ran that, I should see both, right? There we go. So it's important to note that if you want to do the UDP scanning, you should do it that route. I will tell you this, the S capital U by itself, for all ports, it takes a very long time in Nmap. This is a sidebar. The one I like to use for the UDP stuff is called Unicorn Scan because it's a lot quicker. So let me just show you this real quick, just as a sidebar. So it would be TAC M capital U for the mode of UDP, and then TAC R, I'll just say, I don't know, 250 packets that I want to send, and then TAC capital I to say immediately, to give it some urgency, if you will. And I'll say 156.103. So this one here, as soon as I run it, you're going to find It's fairly quick, right? It actually finds all the open ports that are UDP, okay? Now, if I were to do the same type of scenario, but this time use Nmap and not specify ports there and not have TCP, you'll notice it'll take a while. And as you keep it going, it will take a very long time. So I don't prefer to use Nmap for the UDP scan portion of it. I prefer that one called Unicorn Scan. Pretty cool one. Now also you can do a port by its protocol that's running on there. In this case, SMTP. And that would tell me if it's port 25, right? So that's what it's looking for, is port 25. Those sort of things. And we already did this one, so I showed you that one. That was the SU for UDP scan. Now to look for operating system, TAC capital O, but again, the TAC capital A one does this as part of its scan. So I don't really need to run it by itself. We can just add that TAC capital A. Now let's get into the timing portion of it. So you have this thing called TAC T, and it goes from 1 through 5, 5 being the fastest. 1 being the slowest. You're probably thinking, well, Ray, why would I want to run a very slow Nmap scan? Well, let's say you've been tasked with a black box type of test and you don't really know what's going on over there. By black box, I mean the people asking you to pen test them didn't give you any information, and you want to find out what ports are going to be open, and you want to kind of evade the all CNI of Sauron for admins. And admins will typically look to see if there's a lot of sequential port queries in a row in very quick succession. That'll typically be a flag for an admin. Now, if I did, and I remember this from Harlem Nights, if you remember that 80s movie, this, I don't know why it always brings it up for me, but this one is more, if I do a T1, it'll basically go, well, let me send a probe here to port 21. And then 5 minutes later, well, let me send one now to 22. 5 minutes later, let me send one, you know where I'm going with that. And all I can think of is that Harlem Nights with that one, that guy had a little pea shooter. Bing! Bing! That's funny. Anyways, this one would be a good one if you're going to go do some groceries, go watch a movie, and just let your scan run. And you can say, well, I'm going to do the slowest scan possible and make sure that it's, has a lot of time in between each probe where it's not going to be, probably it's not going to be flagged or noticed in this case. That's the idea behind it. And then T5, again, is just full on, full throttle, fast as can be. Now, the reason I put these verbose and these debug switches here is to kind of show you what it's using to determine that. So let's do that real quick. Let's do, and I don't even know why I have this cheat sheet now. See, look at this, this TAC S capital U UDP scan. See how long it's taken? And I've already got my answers from the unicorn scan, so I'm going to Control C out of that. Anyways, I don't know why I have my cheat sheet because I'm typing everything in anyways, but well, regardless. So if I say TAC capital T 1, which is a slow one, and I say I want some very verbose nonsense here and some debug information as well, it's going to show me while it's scanning what it's doing, right? So in this case here, I'm going to say 192.168.56.103. Now you'll notice the timing report listed here. Something to point out here would be like this right here. Max scan delay. For any TCP probes, it's going to wait, I believe this is by seconds or milliseconds, but it's 1,000 seconds or milliseconds. I can't remember off the top of my head. And then it will do its first ping or probe, and then it will wait another 1,000 seconds and do another one, that sort of thing. And you can set those yourself too, right? I mean, you can actually influence those particular ones with some switches, but these will be what you're looking at. Again, the rate at which it's going is pretty high in this case here. Same with the timeout windows and max retries and all this other stuff. Now, on the flip side of that, if I were to do the T5 one, let me go back over here and Control C out of this. Yes, no. Looks like it's having a hard time with it. All right, let's close this out, open another window. So I could do the Nmap and then TAC T5. And again, we'll do the 192.168.56.103. Add in my, and I'm just doing this to show you can put it pretty much anywhere. And I'm going to add the verbosity here. I'm going to hit enter, and then I'm going to control C real quick because it's going to go down pretty far. So notice here, the max scan delay is 5, not 1,000. See, so it's a lot quicker in this particular case here. Max retries down to 2 instead of 10. Those sort of things are going to be in here. Instead of 250,000 for timeouts, we have 250. So I mean, there's a big difference between the 1 and the 5, the T1 and the T5. So those are examples of where you can use timing when you're doing your scans. Pretty awesome stuff. Now, if I do want to output it, I can output it in a variety of formats. So if I want to save my scan for later, I can output it in a variety of different ways. You have your, let me think if I remember all of them now. You have XML, you have your regular Nmap one, which we've been seeing on the screen. Then you have a greppable one, which grep is a searchable tool that you can use in there. And then there is another one. I'm trying to remember the name of it. Let's see. Normal XML script kitty, which I don't know what that is. I don't know what format that is. And then greppable. But if I want to do all formats, I do TAC-O capital A, right? So in this case here, what I'll do is I'll make a directory, Nmap stuff, CD over to it, Nmap stuff, and I'm going to run my scan from here. So if I said Nmap, and I'm not going to add any switches or anything like that, but I'll do TAC-O capital A for all formats, and I'll call it Leroy Jenkins. Leroy Jenkins. And then I'll just put the address, 192.168.56.103. I'm saying do the scan, let me see it, and also put it in these formats that I can look at and use for later. So the greppable one will have, I think, some different switch slashes in it or whatever to separate it out. And then there will be the Nmap one. I'm curious about the script kitty one. So now if I do an LS, you'll see, oh, they must have taken out the script kitty one. So now I can see there's an XML version, there's an Nmap version, and a GNmap, which is greppable in this case here. So I'm going to use a command called cat, which will display on terminal the contents of a particular file. So I'll say cat, the GNmap one, and you can see it's got a different kind of format with the slashes on it for greppable, if you will. And then in this case here, if I want the XML one, now for this one, to see it nice in the browser, you'll also have to copy a style sheet over as well to be able to do that. But you can see this is the version of the same thing, but in XML format. And of course, you have just your regular Nmap version, which is the one that we're very used to, that we've been seeing, which is that. Okay, so those are the ways that you can output it into this. Let's talk a little bit about scripts. So Nmap has a large amount of scripts. I think last tally there's around 500, but it has a scripting engine where it uses Lua scripting, and the extension for the scripts are .nsc. In this case here, they've separated them into different categories. The reason why is because when you use an Nmap and you're on a pen test engagement, let's say, there may be some scopes to your pen test. They'll say, I don't want anything intrusive. I don't want anything that possibly could take down my production server or what have you. So there are certain scripts that are considered safe that are not intrusive, and they're put into a category called safe. Default category typically has all safe scripts. And that can be polled or done through with S-C for the default. If you look online to Nmap, I'm not currently connected to the internet with this VM, but if you look online, you'll see all of the different categories of scripts, but we'll take a look at some of those as well. But here's what they would look like. So you got auth, you have broadcast. So essentially, it actually gives Nmap extended capabilities to be even more so awesome as a tool by doing exploitation as well. And again, you can go on GitHub and download other people's scripts if you trust it. Download other people's NSC scripts and then put them in the script directory of your Nmap install, and then do a script-update db, and it will add it to the scripts. And typically when somebody writes their own script, they'll actually create a category in the script itself, and it will actually drop it into the category. So if I want to look at some of them here, I can go back over here and I can say Nmap tac script -help, and then I can give a category. Okay, so for the default, I'll just say default. It's going to actually do quite a few of them here. And actually, let me do this. I'm going to go ahead and do a pipe symbol and then the word more. And what that will do is allow me to go page by page because there's actually quite a few of them and I don't want to scroll up and do all that. So I'm going to do more and it's going to take it page by page. So here we can see, if I keep hitting my space bar, these are different scripts that are in the default category. Okay, and the ones that we see commonly and the ones that I do are the HTTP ones. But this one here actually is in this one, I think, is the Ftp scripts, right? So here we can see in this particular one, it says the categories is the default, auth, and safe. So we know that this is not intrusive. It's been tested to not be the case. Now, if I go down and look through it, and it tells me kind of what it does here. It says if anonymous is allowed, it gets a directory listed in the root directory. So if I know the FTP is anonymous, this script will tell me. Okay, it'll basically try to log in with anonymous, and if it responds correctly and lets me in, then it reports it in the Nmap scan that it is the case. Okay, so this is an example of these different scripts that you can get to. Now, to use the script, there's a few different ways you can do it because there's also arguments you can add. But in this case, let's say we wanted to find out the HTTP headers and the title of the web page that's being run on the HTTP server that's on this particular machine. Okay, so we'll do a nmap tac script headers, and then I'll give the address and 103. And what it will do is we'll do a normal regular scan, and then it will actually go ahead and pull out that information using the script headers. Now, if we go back here while that's running and we look, scroll up here, you see this right here? This was already run before. So we already know that the title of it is this, right? And that's because it's using a script. And when I do the S-C in my actual Nmap scan, this is considered one of the default scripts, okay, in that default category. So it should give me the same results here on this, but it doesn't, it does right here. See? So that's me using these two particular scripts to get this information. That's how you use the scripts in here. You can also add, some of them will actually require that you have like an argument as well. And the arguments will be listed on the web page help file to what to add. And it would look like this, script-args, and then whatever arguments that you want to add in there as well. Now, if you want to look for ones that are specific to, let's say, FTP, you can do a nmap, and then you can say tac script dash help equals, and then put quotations there. I'll say FTP asterisk for wildcard. I'm basically saying look in our scripts and give me any scripts, no matter what category, that have to do with FTP, or I'm sorry, that have the word FTP in the title of it at all. So everything that comes up with the name FTP in the title will show up here on this. Okay, pretty awesome stuff. And yeah, that's a quick way to get down through and find a particular script. Now, again, if you did download a script from GitHub from somebody else, it'd be wise to look through it to verify that it's safe, that they're not trying to actually give you a backdoor, because that does happen. There's no honor amongst thieves. But if you do trust it and you want to put it in there, you would put it in your script category, a folder under the Nmap, USR share Nmap for me, for Cali. And then you run tac script -update -db, and it will add it to your normal scripts. Okay, pretty awesome stuff. And again, I showed you the help and all that stuff. Now, something else that we won't get deep into here, but this is something for another video called Metasploit. But Metasploit is a exploitation framework, but you can actually do Nmap scans and put it into your Metasploit workspace, which is kind of its own little database, if you will, in PostgreSQL. And to do that, you would start the Nmap scan by db_nmap. You would do it within Metasploit. But that's for another video because, again, we'll talk about Metasploit in a later one. All right, let's also end this up here by talking about some different evasion techniques you can use as well. So when it comes to evasion, again, the idea is that you don't want to be seen, right? At my workplace, where I work at, There's a lot of times where I'm the consultant for cybersecurity stuff, and so some of the incident response people who monitor things like, you know, whatever MSP we're using or whatever, and that MSP shows a flag saying, hey, this looks like a port scan. And it would kind of list out the details, and they would send it to me and they say, hey, you know, can you look at this and tell us what your analysis is of it and stuff like that. So there are EDR tools out there and MSPs that do look specifically to see if something looks like somebody's doing a port scan, because what's the intent of a port scan? Well, the intent is an attacker wants to find out what ports are open so they can start blasting away. So it kind of alerts the admin of the company to say, hey, listen, somebody's attempting something and they're doing a port scan. They're trying to poke around and find out what's going on. So as an attacker, I don't want to be found. Okay, I don't want to. That's why the TAC capital A is not typically done for, you know, stealth purposes, things like that. But there are some different ways that you can try to avoid or evade the all-seeing eye of Sauron with, with the admin. You can see I'm a Lord of the Rings fan. But the first one here would be a fragment, where you can fragment the packet up into smaller bits. And that way it would somewhat get past a lot of filters that look for a full complete packet, or maybe look for a certain MTU size, maximum transmission unit size. It may fool some of those, but you do run into the problem that there are some packets and some connections that may have a problem with reassembly of fragmented packets. But essentially, you run the TACF on it. Now, this would be a good one to go ahead and use my Wireshark on. So for that, like I said, we would do Nmap, and I would say TACF, and 192.168.56.103. Okay, so I run that, and let's go look at the capture here. And eventually you'll start seeing some that will pop up here saying that there was some fragmented packets telling us that that's what it's doing. And you can look at the actual, excuse me, you can look at the actual packet and see. So right there you can see fragmented IP protocol. If I look at the SYN, let's grab a SYN here. I'm going to grab that SYN packet. So if we go down here, you can see right there it says fragment offset 16. That's because that Nmap scan is doing that. Okay, and it recognizes it again as a fragmented IP protocol that's listed right there. Okay, so that's the idea behind doing that. Again, trying to make it a little bit more difficult. Another one I really like is this decoy one. This one's kind of interesting here. Let me show you this. That's pretty cool. So this one allows you, let's say for instance, you know the network you're in, or even let's just say that you broke into one machine, and that one machine is connected to a subnet. And that subnet has 30 computers in that same subnet. I can run some scans from the compromised machine to find out what other IP addresses are of the machines that are on that same subnet. Now, for an admin, when they see certain IP addresses that are whitelisted, that's not going to really draw their ire. And I could essentially put my scan in a mix of all these other ones to kind of hopefully, you know, pass the eyeball of the admin. So in this case here, I'm going to go ahead and add this in. So what I'm doing in this case here, let me 192.168.56.103. What I'm trying to do in this particular case is I'm trying to give these other IP addresses and look as if they are scanning this target. So you would start off with a TAC capital D for decoy, and then you would list with a comma all the IP addresses. It could be 30, it could be 100. All the other IP addresses that you want to appear are scanning. And then lastly, without a comma, you put in the target in this case here. So let me show you what that would look like. And let me pause the video for a second because I can hear my wife's robot cleaning devices kicked in. And that may show up on the audio, so hold on one second. All right, I got that taken care of. Let's go take a look back at where we're at. All right, let's go look at the capture now. I'm gonna hit stop, and let's go ahead and scroll up. So as you go down through now, what you'll notice, the source addresses to those particular ports, you'll notice we have our initial one, which is this, 101. But look, 15, 10, 11. So 101, 15, 10, 11, 101. So essentially it looks to the admin as if legitimate computers on the network, 15, 10, 11, are doing some sort of communication with the server. And to them, it may not draw their ire. And old Shikara Ganai here gets thrown into the mix as well as .101, and they may overlook that. So it's pretty cool. Little decoy device there. I like that one. So that's one. Another one here is to actually look like it's coming from a different source port. For instance, if I'm doing my scans and I look here at this 101, look at the source port, 64585, okay? To the admin, that's like, what? Wait a minute now. I don't recognize that. That's a dynamically created port. That's not an actual service that's probing this particular machine, so it may draw their ire. But if the source port showed 53, then the admin may think it's just our DNS server locally that is actually querying or communicating with the target, in this case, .103. So that's a way to do it as well. So in this case here, let me start this scan again. So in that case here, I'll do Nmap, and then we'll say TAC G, and then I'll say 53. Now there are limited ports that they have listed for this. Things like DHCP is one of them. I think port 80, 53, FTP, I think. But it's not all ports, so just read documentation on it. But I know for sure they have this one. So I'm saying 192.168.56.103 is our target. So we're going to do our regular scan, but this time the source port from me, .101, will look as if it's coming from port 53 DNS, and the admin may say, oh, well, that's common. I mean, that's our DNS server. It's communicating or whatever. And it may not raise their ire. So let's go down and look and see. All right, so here we go. So look at the source ports here. 53, 53, 53, 53. So this is my machine, 101. So it looks like the DNS server is communicating with these ports on there. Now, obviously, if you're a good admin, you'll recognize DNS servers typically don't do this sort of activity. But if you're just kind of like eating your Doritos and you're just kind of a lazy admin, as it were, and you're just kind of looking and saying, oh, let's take a look at the source port, or even if you're just filtering to see, or 53 maybe whitelisted or something to that effect, this could possibly get through as well. Pretty awesome stuff. Then you can also randomize the host. Now, I do believe that by default, what I was doing actually does randomize the host. So I'm not really sure too much what's going on with that, but I believe it's with the IP address. So I'll say tac randomize dash hosts. I think it's plural. I'm not sure. Host, yep. And put the target, so 192.168.56.103. All right, let me start my scan up again. This is a great way to learn with, is using this Wireshark. All right, let's do that. So now it should actually do a randomized host, because mine is .101, and this would be kind of like what you would call spoofing, if you will, the host of where it's coming from. So let's take a look here while it's running. Let's see. Doesn't seem to be doing what I had hoped it would do. That's an odd one. I think it means by, oh, I'm sorry. I think it's doing it instead of a sequential order. I'm sorry, not the host, not the source host. This is basically doing what it's been doing. So it must do it by default, because normally when I scan, it doesn't do it in sequential order. If I don't put any switches or anything like that, it seems to do it randomly anyway. So I'm not really sure. What good this one would be. I think by default it already does it. So I'm sorry, I misspoke on that. Essentially what we're doing is we're saying we're going to randomly scan different ports instead of doing it sequential, like instead of scanning for port 1, port 2, port 3, port 4, because that definitely will raise the eyeballs of an admin. They'll say, hey, what's this sequential order that they're doing here? This looks like a regular port scan. This is more of a random one, and if you tie this with like the capital T1 for the slow speed, you know, where it does like a single ping, and then 5 minutes later it does another one, that kind of thing, then this would actually work pretty well if you tie those two together. But again, by default, all of my scans from the very beginning of this video have been randomized for the port, so I'm not really sure exactly what great usage that would be on that one. And the last one I'm going to go over is the spoofing of the MAC. Now, while you're probably thinking, well, why would I want to spoof the MAC address? Well, think of it like this. If I'm an admin and I know that in my company, all we use is Dell computers, or all we use is Cisco, or what have you, then if anything comes in with a MAC address that is not specific to Dell, then I'm going to be wary of that, because all of my computers are Dell. So if it's not Dell, then I know there's a big issue. And you're probably thinking, well, how do they determine that? Well, on your NIC card, you have a MAC address, and the MAC address has some different areas. Let me back here. I'll do if config. There we go. So on the MAC address, it will look like this here. Okay. So on a MAC address, the first three, what they call octets, are what they call an OUI. Okay. It's an identifier for the manufacturer of the actual card, not the chipset, but the actual card itself. Then the last three are the random portions of the MAC address that makes your MAC address unique from other ones. So to find out what computer it's coming from, what manufacturer of the NIC card or whatever, then this is the number that would be queried. And that's the thing that will change if we spoof the MAC address. So if we spoof it to be Dell, then, and we're not actually a Dell computer, then that will actually hopefully get past the admin to see that. So again, we use Nmap tac spoof -mac, and I'll just say Dell. Okay, it has to be one. The format of it is, let me see. I think I wrote down the formats. Yeah. So some examples would be the name. The other example would be the MAC address, right? Those sort of things. Cisco, Apple, whatever. So in this case, I'm just going to say, let's spoof the MAC address of Dell. Now, it may not show up correctly in Wireshark because, again, it's using my VirtualBox NIC card. So it's usually typically showing up as PCM something or other, but I'll still capture it, but it likely won't show it properly, just so you know. But on a real machine without a virtual machine, it should legitimately do it. So we'll say 192.168.56.103. And you'll see right here that it's spoofing Dell EMC. Now, if you were to look this up under a MAC lookup for OUI, you would notice that that would be Dell. Excuse me. In this case, we can see this is an example of why we use TAC capital PN, because again, we already know there are ports open here, but it's not finishing the scan because it seems to be blocking the ping probes in this case, which is kind of odd because it didn't do it for some other ones, but it is what it is. So if I did the exact same thing, whoops, let me go back here again. What is it, Dell? So if I did the TAC PN and then the address, 192.168.56.103. Okay, now we'll actually hopefully run the scan itself. And, weird. Anyways, the spoofing part is what we're looking for on this. So let's look down through here. There it is right there, Dell. So you can see it looks as if my source was Dell. And obviously you'd have to kind of work with it to find out what scans work with this particular switch, because it looks like the normal default Nmap scan doesn't seem to be doing anything for it. But in this case here, again, it's using the Dell one. Now you'll notice more than likely that a lot of these here will be ones that will show up as whatever your VirtualBox instance is, that sort of thing. So I wouldn't worry too much about that. But anyways, that's kind of what you use for the MAC address to spoof it. So there's a variety of different ways that you can do things with Nmap. So all in all, there's a lot more other things that Nmap can do, but those are kind of the basics of what you would use it for, and some different techniques on how and what switches you would use, how you would evade certain things, how you would use a scripting engine. So I hope this was a good deep dive. A lot of the videos forthcoming in this series probably won't be this long, but Nmap is a pretty big beast, so I wanted to make sure I was very clear about everything in it. But yeah, I hope you guys enjoyed learning about this here in this new series I got called Don't Be a Tool. And I think for the next one, we'll do probably either the Dradis one and also maybe some Burp Suite we'll add in there as well. I'm thinking SQL Map will be one. Metasploit's a tool we can use. We'll talk about that as well. So we'll go over some variety of different things. And if you like these sort of videos. You can also look at my other videos in my series, and one of the video series is called Pop, 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 another server drop, where I use CTFs to teach cybersecurity concepts using a lot of these different commands and switches and tools. And then I have another one called the Bounty Hunter Training, which is for bug bounty kind of things, where I'm teaching you some basic web application stuff. So a lot of the tools that you learn in this series will actually be relayed back and used in those particular video series as well to give you more clarity. So yeah, other than that, that is it for today. I hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, make sure you subscribe and hit the bell notification to let us know that you want to see more videos like this, and leave a comment as well. Tell us how we're doing. Other than that, have a great time. Peace out, players.